Hey everybody, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. We've got an exciting show lined up. We've got something new we're going to try here with the live broadcast. I've done something that I think is going to be a little more interesting than the other live broadcasts that we've had. I think it's going to make for a smoother experience for everybody. Hey everybody, what's up? So we'll jump right in to Question Period and see if you can spot the differences in the format.
For the first time in 60 years, rent is rising faster than salaries.
Sounds like they're having some audio
according to the Bank of
issues.
Montreal. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, rent has doubled, mortgage payments
But we've
have
got a
doubled,
way to take care of that.
and down payments have doubled too. Will the Prime Minister finally watch my documentary? It's an unprecedented, very striking, common sense documentary. And will the Prime Minister come up with a common sense plan to bring down grocery prices and build homes that people can afford and can buy?
It's a common sense question.
It's a shame that the honourable member doesn't put as much energy into generating housing policies as he does to generating housing videos. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is when I actually look at the measures he's putting forward, including in the video, they're going to result in fewer homes being constructed than we are already on pace to build. He plans to put the GST back on some home construction. He plans to cut funding for cities who are trying to build more housing, and he plans for Canada to get out of the home building game altogether. Mr. Speaker, we will make the investments necessary to build more homes and not adopt the strategy to cut home funding like the Conservatives would.
Sean didn't seem like he got enough sleep last night.
Speaker, he clearly didn't watch my common sense documentary, which is being widely acclaimed by all. If he had, he would know the facts. Our common sense plan takes the GST off for apartments that are affordable, below average cost. He wants to take it off just for $10 million penthouses. We want to take the bureaucracy out of the picture so home builders can build. He's got a $4 billion fund that, according to the city of Halifax, is funding more bureaucratic gatekeepers. So why won't he watch the documentary, follow the common sense plan to get rid of the taxes and the bureaucracy and build more homes?
The Honourable
Good
Minister
question.
of Housing.
Fraser's going to be dancing.
It's fascinating. For him, it's about how many people are going to watch his Twitter videos. For me, it's about how many people are going to have a roof over their head.
Hear, hear.
The right path forward is going to have Canada make investments in home building, not cuts to home builders. The right investment will reduce taxes on the construction of homes, not put taxes on them. Mr. Speaker, the right path forward will not repeat the mistakes of the past by cutting funding for affordable housing for 30 years, as that honourable member pledges to do. We will make the investments. We will not accept that cuts are the right approach.
The Honourable
What's wrong with his left shoulder?
But here's the reality. People don't have roofs over their head. After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his housing minister of photo ops and media puff pieces, the rent has doubled. Mortgage payments have doubled. Down payments have doubled. In his own home province, in Halifax, they now have 30 homeless encampments. 9 out of 10 young people say they will never be able to afford a home. And what have they done? Create a $4 billion housing accelerator that 2 years later hasn't completed a single solitary house. Why won't they get rid of the bureaucracy and the taxes so that we can bring homes Canadians can afford?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, the irony when I take criticisms about photo ops from that member is shocking, because he continues to use his opportunities to travel around the country on the government's dime to take pictures in front of projects that our government funded. The reality is the fund that he is talking about has secured agreements that will change the way that cities are built, not just in Halifax, but in Moncton, Kitchener, Kelowna, Calgary, Vaughan, Brampton, Richmond Hill, London, Hamilton, the province of Quebec, and I will continue the more time he gives.
Fraser did a little better that time with his
The
wording.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
You know, all those homes in all those cities that he's talking about, they're all open concept. They have no walls, they have no windows, they have no roofs, they have no basements, no kitchens, no bathrooms. In fact, Mr. Speaker, other than that, they're the best homes you can imagine, and you'll have to imagine them because after 8 years, they still don't exist. So, Instead of pouring billions of dollars into local government gatekeepers who block construction, why won't he follow my common sense plan to require cities boost housing construction by 15% a year or lose their money unless they beat the target and get a building bonus? Common sense.
Common sense.
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Fraser's back.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member's argument falls apart when you come to understand he ignores the good work that has been done since the National Housing Strategy was adopted in 2017. There are hundreds of thousands of homes that exist today that have been built or retrofitted as a direct result of government supports that have put them in place. Mr. Speaker, when you actually look at what the honourable member's policy will do, it will raise taxes on middle-class home construction. It will cut funding to cities who desperately need the infrastructure so they can build more homes, and he will remove support for affordable housing altogether, which is a cardinal sin we cannot repeat after a 30-year history where we should have learned those lessons.
So this is interesting. You guys pay attention. See if you notice the changes that we've made to the law.
To make a confession.
They'll be coming up.
That since 2017, when they brought in this program, housing costs have doubled. The rent has doubled. Mortgage payments have doubled. The needed down payment have all doubled. My common sense plan, which is in a 15-minute documentary he can watch between photo ops while he's being chauffeured around, would ensure that cities have to permit 15% more homes in order to keep their funding. It would take taxes off construction, including carbon taxes off of building materials, and it would require CMHC bureaucrats quickly approve financing or lose their bonuses and get fired. This is a common sense plan. Why won't he get working to implement it?
Sounds good.
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
I'm fond
Fraser's
of the honourable
back.
member's soliloquies on biblical passages, Mr. Speaker. Somebody who read scripture in church growing up, and if there's one lesson I took, it's that we all have a responsibility to help the vulnerable members of our community. The reality is we have been investing since 2017 to put money in place that's actually going to support people who do not have a roof over their head, to build more affordable housing after 30 years of Liberal and Conservative governments not taking the issue of housing seriously. The honourable member plans to make cuts where we will make investment, and I know which path will put a roof over more of my neighbors' heads.
COVID investments.
Mr. Speaker, the holidays are coming up, and parents are stressed
you see what
about
happened
covering
there?
presents for the kids and managing
No
the costs
Bloc
of a
Québécois.
turkey dinner.
No
Meanwhile,
translators.
Canada's biggest grocery chains
Live.
are making bucket loads of excess profit. While families struggle
do you
this
think of that?
holiday season, the Liberals are offering families a lump of coal. No solutions, just words. But the NDP is getting results. We've summoned the grocery CEOs back to testify on food prices, and Sobeys is here today. Will the minister take this opportunity to put his foot down on unchecked price gouging that's driving up food prices?
Good question. It's weird when the coalition looks like it's breaking up, though.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands that this is a challenging time for too many families across the country, and that is why we are there to support families. We're there to support them with the Canada Child Benefit. We're there to support them with a historic investment in early learning and childcare. 2.3 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty thanks to support from our government. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, it is important
Look
for
at
the
that
biggest
face.
companies to pay their fair share. We think we need to introduce more competition into the grocery sector, and we're doing that with a historic transformation of competition law.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years of the Civil NDP government, they plan on quadrupling their carbon
fan
tax
of
cap
Raj.
to crush families, farmers, and First Nations further. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He refuses to tell his senators to stand down and pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 to take the tax off our farmers. Even First Nation communities, more than 100, are fed up and taking this government to court over the carbon tax, saying it's disproportionate and an unfair burden to them. When will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off families, farmers, First Nations, finally?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And for the fourth or fifth time, I'd like to remind the Conservatives that the
First
only
time he's
senators,
spoken in a few days.
that sit in a caucus, sit in their Conservative caucus, and the Senate is in fact independent, Mr. Speaker. And I would actually like to raise the fact that the Conservatives have had this really troubling trend of bullying, particularly female senators, whenever they're not getting what they want out of the Senate, and that's a real problem, Mr. Speaker. That's a problem for democracy, and they should reconsider how they manage their affairs on Twitter and accusing senators of not advancing their legislation at their whimsy.
This thing about the Senate keeps coming up. I'm doing a story on it.
Swore at a girl in her DMs.
It's a lot.
After 8 years, the Civil NDP government's empty acts of reconciliation are not worth the cost. A recent Auditor General report proved the carbon tax is an unfair burden on Indigenous communities, something that the Chiefs of Ontario reiterated just last week. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? So is this Liberal NDP government, because they still plan on quadrupling this carbon tax scam. When will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off families, farmers, First Nations, finally?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, a price on pollution is an important part of addressing the climate issue in a manner that actually promotes innovation and incentives. But let me read you a couple of things here. I quote, "We recognize that the most efficient way to reduce our emissions is to use pricing mechanisms." I quote, "We will work with the provinces and territories at both the national and state level to develop a trade system for greenhouse gases." Those are the Conservative Party platform from 2008 and 2021. My God, it's the height of hypocrisy in this chamber.
Jonathan Wilkinson's kind of weak sauce, hey?
Common sense Conservative Bill 234 will save farmers close to $1 billion. But this Prime Minister who is demanding his senators block this bill is not worth the cost. The Keelstar farm in Okotoks paid $180,000 in carbon taxes this year. When the Prime Minister quadruples that tax, it'll be $480,000 just in carbon taxes. There is no way, when 2 million Canadians are relying on food banks, that we cannot afford to have affordable, nutritious, Canadian-grown food. Will the Prime Minister finally remove the carbon tax from families, farmers, and First Nations?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker,
oh, Lord.
being a farmer,
I don't want to
fully
pick on any
understand how
senior
important it
citizens.
is to take care of the soil and to take care of the environment. Our party has a plan
Come on,
for the
Larry.
environment. My honourable colleague's party does not have a plan for the environment. Quite simply, we're able to make, with our plan, millions of dollars in British Columbia to help farmers innovate, increase their production, and make sure farmers remain on the cutting edge. We have and will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
I agree with the Agriculture Minister. Our plan is definitely not to bankrupt farmers and continue to make food unaffordable.
It's just practical.
Canadian farmers are struggling under punishing input costs like the carbon tax. In fact, often the carbon tax costs them more than the natural gas they use. But the Bill C-234, a common sense Conservative bill, is the solution. But the Prime Minister is blocking his senators from passing this bill in the Senate.
They do have
Will the Prime
senators.
Minister follow his 2001 campaign and pass it forward and let this bill pass the Senate and finally take the carbon tax off farmers, families, and First Nations?
In 2019, the Liberal caucus of senators changed their name to the Progressive Senators. That's the only
I
change.
appreciate my colleague's concern, but I think he's fully aware the only party in this House that has any control over senators is the Conservative
It's such
Party
bull.
in Canada.
It's such. It's
We
such.
do not have senators
It's
in
piss
our
off that
party.
they do this.
And there was
They're
some
straight
talk
up
of
lying to you.
harassment
Straight up.
in the Senate. We're not involved in harassment. What we want to do as a government is make sure
So
we make
old Larry
farmers
McCauley's on the
innovate,
list of people. I'm not going to be
produce more product,
pitying this
and be more
senior
profitable.
citizen
We
anymore
have and will
for that
continue to
if he's
do
going
that.
to lie straight to us. Like,
Just want to say, I mean, the Honourable Member is right here next to me. I can't hear him at all. The Honourable Member...
that's how you handle a rowdy house.
Middlesex.
Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government's punishing policies, Canadians are hungrier than ever. First, Canada's premiers asked for a carve-out. The Prime Minister, well, he said no. Then farmers asked for a carve-out, and the Prime Minister, he said no. Now Ontario's First Nation leaders are asking the federal court to exempt their communities from the federal carbon tax. Canada is unified, and one thing is clear. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. So will the Prime Minister cut the carbon tax for farmers, families, and First Nations finally?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and
She doesn't
Climate
ask a lot of
Change.
questions,
Thank you very much,
Leanne
Mr.
Wood.
Speaker. And just like everyone in this House, I share the goal of ensuring the success of our Canadian farmers, and that's why our government has exempted gas and diesel for farm use from pollution pricing. We've created a rural top-up for rebates, and we've doubled it. We've directly returned the proceeds collected in proportion to the amount collected. We've also returned $120 million to farmers in the last year. In addition to that, $500 million in R&D for new technologies to make sure that grain drying is less and less emitting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member, Len Kent Middlesex.
It's almost like these Liberals think that farmers haven't had it so good and Canadians haven't had it so good, but they're struggling to put food on their tables and afford food. Brian, a farmer in my riding, told me he's paid over $16,000 in carbon tax to heat his 2 chicken barns this year. And the Prime Minister, well, he wants to quadruple the carbon tax. It's really not that difficult to understand. If it costs farmers more to grow food, it costs more to buy food. Clearly, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. So will the Prime Minister finally remove the carbon tax for farmers, families, and First Nations?
The Honourable Minister of
She speaks well.
Agriculture.
She doesn't ask a lot of questions.
Mr. Speaker, what farmers and ranchers cannot understand is why her party does not have a plan for the environment. I can tell my honourable colleague that we do have a plan for the environment.
Yeah, he's on the cutting edge
farmers and ranchers
of everything.
And that's why we're able to make announcements like in Manitoba a couple of weeks ago to announce Living Labs. This gives an opportunity for scientists, farmers, and industry itself to work together to make sure we keep farmers on the cutting edge. Mr. Speaker, we have and will continue to make sure farmers remain on the cutting edge.
L'honorable député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Like that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Three CEOs raked in billions of profits as they jacked up prices.
Sorry, that's a bad
for
cut,
Canadians
but
just trying to put
we
food
just
on the
saved
table.
5 minutes
And
of
what did
Bloc
the Prime
Québécois
Minister do?
questions.
Nothing. And now Sobeys workers in Halifax are on the streets demanding fair wages so they can afford to buy the food that they sell. Sobeys CEO, who makes $6.8 million a year, has insulted their workers with a 5-cent raise per hour, a nickel. So what is this government doing to tackle the corporate greed that is exploiting workers from coast to coast?
Matt Green seems all right, but the NDP, I don't know, I have trouble with the coalition.
Our government absolutely believes that everyone in Canada needs to pay their fair share. That's why we have permanently increased corporate income tax on financial institutions by 1.5%. That is why we implemented a COVID recovery dividend of 15%. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we are introducing historic changes to competition law in Canada. These will increase competition, particularly in the grocery sector. That is going to help Canadian families from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
Canadians with loved ones in Gaza have spent many sleepless nights worrying about their families as the humanitarian crisis worsens. UNICEF now calls Gaza the most dangerous place for children in the world. Today, the NDP joined with a coalition of Palestinian families and community groups to call for special immigration measures so that people in Canada can reunite with their loved ones. The Australian government is already doing it. Canada must do the same. Will the Liberals immediately enact special immigration measures to include extended family members of Canadian citizens and permanent residents from Gaza?
Stumbled on our words. It's strange when the NDP comes at the Liberals. I find the coalition government so peculiar. Oh
The
no.
worst place to live in the world right now, and we're very preoccupied by the fact that many children, too many children, and too many women have lost their lives. I met with many humanitarian groups earlier today to share my concern and to hear their thoughts on how we can make sure that Palestinian civilians are protected. And meanwhile, I must say that we are extremely happy that 130 Canadians were able to cross Rafah last night and are now back in Egypt heading towards Canada.
She baked or something? Come on.
Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of NDP Liberal borrowing and spending, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. 90% of Canadian mortgages up for renewal in the next 2 years are at fixed interest rates of about 3%. Today, there are 3 million Canadians about to head to renew their mortgages, and they're facing rates of up to 7%. The Bank of Canada governor has confirmed that excessive government borrowing and spending is driving these rate hikes. So when will the Prime Minister end the inflationary spending, balance the budget to lower rates so that Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and keep their homes?
No question.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am glad that the member opposite has asked a question about mortgage renewals because it gives me an opportunity to be sure that all Canadians know about the Canadian Mortgage Charter, which we published in the Fall Economic Statement a couple of weeks ago. The Canadian Mortgage Charter gives Canadians who are facing a mortgage renewal a clear sense of what they have the right to ask their bank to do in terms of tailored support. It's providing Canadians with relief right now, and I urge everyone to take a look.
I will have to take a look. I've not heard of this one before, so I'm writing it down.
Their mortgage charter and any other photo ops and PR stunts they do are about as useful as monopoly money, but more liberal vanity projects and PR campaigns clearly aren't going to fix the fiscal mess that this liberal NDP government has caused over the last 8 years. Canadians headed to renew their mortgages are facing double the payments. And they're about to find out that this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. So when? I ask when? When will the NDP Liberal government stop the inflationary spending, balance the budget, lower rates, so that Canadians can afford to keep their homes?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I think everyone in this House knows, Canada has a AAA rating and the lowest
This AAA rating
deficit
bullshit. Like,
in
come on.
G7. It is also true, Mr. Speaker, that our government invested in Canadians during COVID, and we were proud to do so. We supported 9 million Canadians with CERB. We supported more than 5 million Canadian jobs with the wage subsidy, and we supported 900,000 Canadian businesses with CEBA loans. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Official Opposition called those big, fat government programs. I call those life rafts for Canadians when they needed them the most.
They're always talking about the AAA credit rating, though. Who cares? That means you can just get more money to go in debt with.
After 8 years of this NDP-backed Liberal Prime Minister, the cost of homes and rent has doubled. Mr. Speaker, it's so bad in St. John's that one man ignored his bail hearing so that he could be sent to jail instead of spending a cold, wet, homeless winter on the streets. When petty criminals choose dilapidated jail cells like those at Her Majesty's Penitentiary over homelessness, it's clear that this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. So will the Prime Minister commit to ending the homeless crisis, or does he take pleasure in seeing people choose jail over homelessness?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think any member of this House of any party takes any pleasure in seeing anyone in this country live on the street, and it would be a shame if the honourable member were suggesting that was the case. When it comes to the supports that we're actually putting in place in the city of St. John's, which he referenced in his question, I would point him to the recent exchange we had with the Mayor of St. John's, where we encouraged them to increase their housing ambition so they could actually provide homes for more people and reduce the cost of rent. The funding that we hope to provide to the city of St. John's, should they meet the moment, comes through a program that he is personally committing to oppose. The Conservatives believe the solution to the housing crisis is to spend less money on housing, and I fundamentally disagree.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna, Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, inflation is caused by the Prime Minister's deficit spending. The Bank of Montreal's chief economist explained that inflation is the new villain, fueling the fires of Canada's housing hell. Rents have skyrocketed 8.2% year over year, the fastest pace since 1983. Rents are up, mortgages are up, inflation's up, interest rates are up.
Everything's
up.
up.
This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. After 8 years, when will this NDP Liberal government stop their deficit spending so people can keep a roof over their head? Thank you.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about some facts and reality. The reality is Canada has the lowest deficit and the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the entire G7. The reality is that when you listen to the objective economists whose job is to judge our fiscal position, the ratings agencies, we have a AAA rating. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? We made the necessary investments to support Canadians. That's why 1.1 million more jobs in Canada than before COVID, why our economy is more than 104% bigger than it was before COVID, Mr. Speaker.
She's not talking to Canadians here.
Canadians depend on affordable proteins like chicken, yet over the last 8 years,
Kirk is great.
families are forced to
Wild
cut
boy
back
from
on
Alberta.
these essentials. Canadian farms lead the world in environmental best practices, but the Liberals choose only to punish them with higher costs, red tape, and a quadrupling of the carbon tax. A chicken farmer near Redwater, Alberta is already paying nearly $2,000 a month in the carbon tax. Come the middle of winter, that cost will double. Costs that are passed on to Canadians who are already struggling to put food on the table. Will these Liberals finally take the tax off families, farmers, and First Nations finally?
He asks great questions.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Young, too. Look how young he is.
Speaking
How old do you
with
think he is?
farmers
35?
Across the country.
Oh, no.
One of
How
the
old do you
biggest
think
concerns
Macaulay
they
is?
have
100?
Why the opposition party does not
78
have a
or
policy
79.
or a plan to deal with the environment. Chicken farmers understand very well, like every other farmer, you need to have a plan. We have to deal with the environment. And because we do have a plan for environment, we're able to assist chicken farmers. We're able to make sure the supply management system remains in shape. You can tell, my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, can tell a chicken farmer that we will make sure that supply management remains strong.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, it is unbelievable how out of touch
Damien
that
Kirk's
ag
great.
minister is. Jake from Vermeer's Dairy near Camrose saw a bill of $1,700 in carbon tax charges alone last month, and it's going to be more as winter settles in on the Canadian prairies. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that these Liberals do not have an environmental plan, but rather a tax plan that punishes those who are best equipped to lower the price of food in this country. Mr. Speaker, my question is simple. Will those Liberals tell their Liberal-appointed senators to pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 to axe the tax so farmers can feed our people?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
I appreciate my honourable question, and my office has been in regular contact with the farmers you spoke about. The operation has benefited from several of our
I don't like
government
picking on
programs,
old folks.
including
Come
the
on.
PRM program and funding through the Climate Action Incentive Fund. We will continue to support large operations in the country, and we will continue to work with small agricultural operations in this country to make sure both operations succeed and expand.
Yeah, so he's 77 and he's been in Parliament since
the NDP Liberal government has
97.
turned their backs on Canadian labour. The government is bringing in 1,600 taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers for the battery assembly plant in Windsor. That's $40 billion or $3,000 in taxes per household. Conservatives have been consistently demanding the release of these contracts publicly, but the NDP have flip-flopped and are working with the Liberals to keep the contracts secret, to hide these bad contracts. When will the Liberals and the NDP stand up for Canadian auto workers and release the contracts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Perkins is pretty good. He's getting better at asking the questions.
Now, either the Conservative leader takes us all for
Turnbull's a
fools,
deadhead.
or he thinks the Canadian public was in a coma for the last 20 years. Either way, no one could take his claim to be protecting local jobs seriously. Not only is his track record as part of the previous Conservative government abysmal, consisting of the loss of over 300,000 manufacturing jobs, he has also proven to be one of the most anti-worker MPs, a legacy which he continues today by demonstrating and opposing legislation that creates good jobs for Canadian workers. While Conservatives pretend to care about workers, we'll continue to create thousands
He's
of
going to get cut off. Yeah. So that's straight from Champagne's playbook. Like those notes he was reading, straight from
workers to back this Prime Minister and his secret deal to bring in overseas replacement workers. It's clear that after 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost to Canadian workers. The NDP member for Windsor voted to keep secret the contracts from Canadian taxpayers. So if the NDP Liberal government have nothing to hide, then why not show Canadians the details that's going to cost them $3,000 per family? So will the Prime Minister finally release the contract details so Canadians can see how many replacement workers $40 billion buys?
There's a lot of people want to see that contract. Count me as one of them.
What the Conservatives claim, our government has always been clear regarding jobs created by investments like LG Stellantis. In a recent article, Yakubuski writes, these workers will only be here for a matter of months. The plant could not be built without them, or at least not in time for battery production to be up and running by 2025. They will not steal jobs from Canadian construction workers, nor occupy any of the 2,500 permanent jobs. Now, I know the opposition leader has a hard time showing respect to journalists, but maybe the Conservatives should stop fear-mongering and read the Globe and Mail.
I can say this. I do like this speaker. Chris D'Entremont is way better than Greg Fergus. Way better. He's just... Watch him. Okay.
We were doing so well right to about there.
All right. This is the way you should handle it, though. It's not what Greg would do.
There we go.
Greg would stand up there and be unfriendly and just weird. Anyway, we're going to skip into the next piece. Because this guy gets the floor going. And again, the speaker has to step in. So it gets loud, and now he's going to handle it. Compare how Greg would handle this to the way Don Schmuck does. He keeps it flowing.
For his consistent advocacy for Alberta and Albertans. Mr. Speaker, any relevant and credible plan.
Turn my own microphone on here. Order.
He's got a friendlier way of doing it, I'm just saying. Look at him. He looks happy. He looks pleasant. That looks like a human being.
Really well. We went really quickly here
Greg
through these
Fergus.
questions. It's been awesome up to now. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources from the top.
I would like to once again thank my honourable colleague for his consistent advocacy for Alberta and Alberta. Mr. Speaker, any relevant, credible plan must take climate change seriously and look to seize the economic opportunities that can come through a transition to a low-carbon future. Last week, Dow announced it was taking advantage of Canada's carbon capture hydrogen investment tax credit to build the world's first net-zero petrochemical facility. It is an $11 billion investment, create 8,000 jobs in construction and hundreds thereafter for Fort Saskatchewan. But it's not just the credits that motivated Dow, and I quote the Dow CEO who said they invested here because, and I quote, Canada has a price on carbon pollution. While Conservatives have no plan, they don't have a plan for the environment, they don't have a plan for the economy, our plan is working.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People with disabilities are being rent-evicted and priced out of their homes. Disproportionately, it's women also at risk of gender violence. Over half of women with disabilities are living on less than $10,000 a year. This is not sustainable or safe. The skyrocketing cost of housing and food is hurting persons with disabilities. They need the Canada Disability Benefit yesterday. Will this Liberal government end their unnecessary delay and release the Canada Disability Benefit immediately?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion.
Mr. Speaker,
Oh,
I'd like to
Lord,
thank
not
the
this
member
guy.
opposite
Yeah.
for her
Oh,
advocacy and
brutal.
for raising the issue of disability. This is a very important concern. Our government is seized by this issue. Thankfully, this parliament passed
looks
the
like,
disability benefit, made
Philippe
it into
Champagne.
law. We are working on the regulations. We are consulting the community fully, and this will happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, only 2 months till a long-awaited inquiry into foreign interference. Sadly, foreign operatives even remotely involved are retired and back in Beijing or Tehran. The Hogue inquiry faces serious time constraints, issuing an interim report in February and a final report by the end of 2024. It took 2 months to create a website and harder to find than interference itself. It strains credulity that the inquiry will be in full force with Santa and New Year's. Aside from its desire for this thorny issue to disappear, does the government find it odd that Canadians can get more information on foreign interference in Canada simply by reading the New York Times?
The Honourable Parliamentary
He always asks his questions like that. It's kind of funny.
As I've said
Oh no,
before,
Jennifer
I'd like to
O'Connell.
take the issues of
I
foreign
hear it.
interference
Yeah.
extremely seriously. We've moved forward with consultations on a
Baby
foreign agent
spice.
registry. We've implemented several measures in this place to
Oh, she took her
strengthen
medication
our
this morning.
democratic institutions. And Mr. Speaker, we look forward to the Hogue recommendations that we will also be looking at very seriously. Mr. Speaker, this is not a partisan issue, but an issue that every single parliamentarian should be taking seriously, and we look forward to working with everyone in this place.
And that's all the time we
Oh,
have.
well,
Question
that
period.
wraps that up, guys. That wraps that up, everybody. So, pretty fun. I hope you like the new style. I'm going to be trying to do that for each one. Like, we can go through them live, but we don't need to be listening to the translators and when there's big delays by Mr. Speaker. I think I can set this up to do this daily so that we get through the question period nice and smooth. It's a good idea to do it. I've got nothing obviously against French, but I find the translators more than the French, the translators are hard to listen to. And when Greg Fergus is slowing everything down, we'll be hauling him out of there too. I'm Ehren, this is Question Period Canada. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be making highlights of today's videos. We'll be posting those later, make other videos too, a bunch of shorts, fun stuff. Check out some of those videos. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're trying new things here, trying to get the messages out there that the Canadian politicians are bringing. And it is fun. Got to be informed. If not, you can't complain if you don't know what's going on. So I'm getting some knowledge backed, a base of knowledge around this so I can have an opinion. That's it. Anyways, I'm Ehren, Question Period Canada. We're out. We'll catch you next time. We'll be back tomorrow. Take care.